Nutty Putty Cave. John Jones, a young 26-year-old man, decided to explore the Nutty Putty Cave in the Utah desert near Salt Lake City. This wasn't his first caving experience, as he and his brother Josh used to explore caves around Utah, even though it was the first time he would have gone into the Nutty Putty Cave specifically. The cave was considered beginner-friendly, as it was well-mapped, and the first main parts were accessible to everyone, such as the maze or the big slide. There were also some harder areas for more experienced cavers, like the birth canal, which was an incredibly tight passage. John wasn't going alone. He went with a group of 11, including family and friends. The cave was closed off at the time because some cavers had previously gotten stuck, but it was reopened and accessible only to those with a specific permit. Josh managed to get one, and on November 24th, 2009, they went in. Everyone stayed in the beginner-friendly areas, but John and Josh quickly got bored and started looking for the harder tunnels they had heard about. They knew about the birth canal, one of the tightest passages in the cave, which, after the narrowest part, had a room where they could stand up and turn around to head back. They ventured into the narrow passages of the cave, and at one point, they reached an area called the corkscrew, named that way because of how hard it was to get through. It was after the corkscrew that cavers would normally turn around, but 5 years before, an accident had happened in that exact spot. A 16-year-old boy named Brock Clark got stuck there, even though he was just 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed only 140 pounds. He had to wait a whole 14 hours before getting freed. John, however, was 6 feet tall and weighed 200 pounds, so he clearly knew he couldn't turn around to go back in that specific part of the tunnel. In a space only 12 inches high, he squeezed his stomach in and kept moving forward until he got to a point where he was headfirst at a downward angle. It looked like there was an area ahead where he could finally turn around, so he kept going in. But what he didn't know was that beyond that ledge, the area was uncharted. No one had been there before him. He still thought he was in some part of the birth canal, and since he knew many cavers felt stuck just like he was, but eventually found a place to turn around, he continued on. After a while, however, he started sliding toward the bottom of the tunnel, almost doing a handstand to hold on and try to push himself back up. He immediately yelled to his brother to stop, and they started discussing what they should do, as John's arms were starting to lose strength. They decided to move forward just a little more and then turn around, because John saw a hole in the floor ahead that he thought might lead to a larger space. What he didn't realize, however, was that it was just a dead-end opening at the bottom of the tunnel. So once he went in, he was stuck in a vertical position, upside down. The opening was just 18 by 10 inches, and any effort to get out proved useless, so he screamed for help. His brother Josh came in feet first and squeezed one of John's legs with his own, trying to pull him out. This also didn't work, and after Josh became exhausted, they decided that he would exit the cave to call for help. John waited there upside down, and gravity kept pushing him further into the opening, with his chest getting compressed against the walls, allowing him to take only small breaths. The first rescuer arrived after 3 hours. She had a rope tied to her ankle, so she could be pulled back out while she put another rope around John's legs to try to pull him out. This also didn't work, so they decided to install a pulley system, which was much stronger than just a human pull, and it was what had gotten Brock Clark free 5 years prior. However, this required a lot of time, since each piece of equipment had to be brought through the entire cave, which took nearly an hour. Also, only one assistant at a time could be there, and only small tools could be brought in. After spending the whole night there, John's body was starting to show the signs of being upside down for more than 12 hours. He had been completely lucid up to that point, but now he was starting to lose his sanity, hallucinating. The oxygen concentration in the air was also dropping lower and lower. During this time, they brought in a device that allowed him to speak with his wife, who encouraged him to hang on. John assured her that he would be out with her soon. Around 4 o'clock, the pulleys were ready, so rescuer Ryan Schurz, who was inside the cave, grabbed John's legs and they activated the pulley. John started screaming in agony as his legs turned blue and no longer had a pulse, telling them to stop. After a brief pause to let him calm down, they tried again, and it seemed to be working. John rose high enough that Ryan was able to make eye contact with him and give him some Gatorade through a tube. His situation was still very bad, however, as his lifeless legs were hitting the ceiling and blocking him from getting out of the hole. They were strongly considering breaking his legs, as time was really starting to run out. Then, the rope holding the pulley broke, pulling everything toward Ryan's face and injuring his face, lips, tongue, and causing a concussion. He lost consciousness briefly, and when he woke up, he immediately left the cave. Meanwhile, John had slipped back into the hole, and it took another hour to repair the pulley. When they tried pulling him out once more, John wasn't responding. Since it would have been impossible to lift him without his help, they sent a medic inside the cave to check whether he was still alive. At 11:56 on November 25th, John Jones was declared dead. The entire cave system was then closed off with concrete, and they placed a plaque to commemorate John Jones's life. Jiudan Cave. Two friends, Wang Yuan and Wang Tao, were highly experienced divers who wanted to enter Jiudan Cave in China to break their own personal depth record. Someone had previously placed a guideline that extended for 525 feet, but they wanted to extend it by another 35 feet, aiming for a total depth of 558 feet. This plan would require them to leave the existing guideline for some time, and because those depths are already dangerous, doing so would have significantly increased the risk. However, they were not only diving experts in general, but also had already completed 15 dives in the cave's northern entrance, so they felt quite confident. They even decided to do a practice dive in open water to reach 500 feet, just to see what it would be like and identify potential problems. Unfortunately, Tao had to skip the practice dive due to illness, so Yuan went alone, and everything went smoothly. On April 18, 2014, after months of preparation, they decided it was time to begin their dive. They estimated it would take about 20 minutes to reach their target depth, and they would only be able to stay there for a few minutes before starting their ascent. Even just a few extra minutes at those depths would require many additional hours of decompression. They also estimated it would take about 3 hours and 50 minutes to get back to the surface safely, allowing enough time for the pressure to not be too harsh on their bodies. Time was of the essence, as every minute mattered. When they started their descent, they noticed that visibility was greatly reduced because of the rainfall in the days prior, but they decided it was not bad enough to postpone the dive. Under normal conditions, divers could usually see about 50 feet ahead, but on that day, visibility was only about 6.5 feet. As extra safety measures, they had previously placed air tanks at various depths, each containing the appropriate gas mixture for that depth. Additionally, a friend named Pei stayed near the cave's surface to assist if needed. Yuan's role was to keep them on the guideline, while Tao's role was to place arrow markers along the line to indicate the direction back to the cave entrance. At such extreme depths, having the correct gas mixture is crucial because both nitrogen and oxygen can become problematic under high pressure. They followed all the guidelines carefully, switching tanks at the appropriate depths. However, around 538 feet, Yuan suddenly felt as though he might lose consciousness. Realizing they needed to ascend to counter these symptoms, and considering they were only 13 feet beyond the established guideline, with visibility around half that distance, they turned back toward the line and the surface. Yuan led them to where the guideline should have been, but they were met with a terrifying situation. The guideline was gone. They searched desperately, hoping to feel or spot it, and eventually found it. But now, there was another problem. Their panic at losing the line had caused them to breathe faster, which consumed more gas than normal. By the time they rediscovered the line, Yuan's cylinder for that depth was nearly empty, so he had to switch back to his main tank, which contained surface air. This was far from ideal. Although he initially felt okay, around the 393-foot mark, he began trembling involuntarily. They desperately needed to reach their next set of cylinders, which were at 243 feet, about 150 feet away. Yuan still had hope until he looked down and saw Tao stuck under a rock. Because of the low visibility, Tao had accidentally swam into the rock and gotten wedged there. Yuan also noticed that Tao wasn't attempting to free himself, but was instead shining his light at his neck, signaling that he was running out of air. Yuan immediately gave Tao an emergency mouthpiece, and Tao freed himself. They resumed their ascent with very little air left, sharing what remained. After some quick calculations, they realized they had roughly 3 minutes of air before it would be gone. Tao was extremely fatigued, and Yuan had to pull him by the arm. When they were about 300 feet from the surface, Yuan checked his air supply again and saw there was only enough for one person to ascend another 130 feet. Fortunately, about 50 feet away were the next set of cylinders they had placed earlier. Suddenly, Yuan saw Tao float past him, rising upward and disappearing in the murky water. Yuan knew Tao must have lost consciousness because he made no attempt to hold on. Yuan swam after him as quickly as he could, but he couldn't see Tao anywhere. With his tank about to run dry, he had to reach the next set of cylinders before searching again. He quickly got to those cylinders, switched tanks, and went back to look for Tao. As he descended once more, he still couldn't find him. His new tank began to run low, so he had to ascend again to the next set of cylinders. Unfortunately, those cylinders were placed at a higher depth because they were meant for use in shallower water, and they would be extremely dangerous to use at deeper depths. If someone were to use those tanks and descend too far, they would risk nitrogen narcosis, a state similar to drunkenness, as nitrogen is absorbed too rapidly. Despite this risk, Yuan still tried to go deeper in search of Tao. At some point, he lost consciousness briefly, and although he woke up moments later, it was the warning sign that he needed to get out immediately. He attempted to follow the necessary decompression decompression stops on the way up, but in his panicked and weakened state, he ascended faster than he should have, stopping for about 3 hours instead of the nearly 4 hours required. Upon surfacing, Yuan immediately told Pei what had happened. Shocked, Pei dove in to search for Tao, but soon realized Yuan might also be in serious trouble because of his rapid ascent. Matter of fact, when Pei returned to the surface, he found Yuan showing symptoms of both nitrogen narcosis and decompression sickness. As soon as Yuan removed his regulator, he began vomiting and twitching, experiencing severe dizziness. They had no choice but to abandon the immediate search for Tao in order to get Yuan urgent medical help. By this time, Yuan was in agonizing pain, especially in his legs. Fortunately, rescuers arrived quickly, but before anyone could re-enter the cave, they needed a full day to plan and gather the correct tanks for those depths. By then, it was almost certain that Tao had died, and the following day, his lifeless body was found at a depth of 176 feet. Yuan spent several days in a decompression chamber, but ultimately made a full recovery. Kalimba Cave Tragedy. It was December 2004, and 9 divers were about to enter the Kalimba cenote for the second time while on vacation in Mexico. Their plan was to follow the guidelines to the Boschchen cenote before turning back. They split into 2 groups. The first would go ahead and set markers to highlight the correct path, while the second would follow. Since the first group had more efficient oxygen tanks, they planned to go farther before returning, while the second group would start heading back earlier. As Team 2 was expected to resurface first, they would remove a specific type of marker called cookies to signal their exit. Seeing that the cookies were gone, Team 1 would then remove their own markers on the way back, ensuring the cave remained clean for future divers. Everything went according to plan. Team 1, noticing the absence of the cookies, began their ascent, but when they resurfaced, Team 2 was nowhere to be found. They searched the area for 30 minutes but found no sign of them. Regrouping at the Kalimba cenote, they geared up to re-enter the tunnel and search for them. By this point, Team 2 had little oxygen left, but suddenly, bubbles appeared in the water, and 2 divers quickly resurfaced. They immediately began explaining what had happened underwater. Instead of following the intended exit path, Team 2 had mistakenly turned left. The return trip should have been short, but they only realized their mistake after swimming 1,400 feet in the wrong direction. By the time they noticed, they were nearly 3,000 feet from the original exit. However, another exit was just 300 feet away. Reaching it posed a serious challenge. They needed to cross a 70-foot gap with no guidelines, making it a dangerous risk of getting lost. Kent, one of the divers, took out his safety line, secured it, and began swimming across. He was just short of reaching the guideline when his line stopped him. It was too short to cover the long gap. Time was running out, and turning back, Kent saw the rest of the group heading toward the initial path, so he swam fast to catch up. By then, their oxygen levels were critically low, and with no air pockets in the cave, the situation was becoming life-threatening. After 25 minutes of swimming, they finally reached the correct line. A 30-minute swim still lay between them and the exit. Bill's oxygen was nearly gone, with only 200 psi left. He moved next to Jean, who had more air, and she shared hers using her emergency extra mouthpiece. The situation was so bad that in tight passages, Bill had to hold his breath while Jean squeezed through first. Then Michael also began running dangerously low on air. Seeing that Jean and Bill were already sharing and could not help him, he panicked. He was the least experienced of the group, and his tank was almost empty. Fortunately, Kent reached him in time, handed him his emergency mouthpiece, and tried to calm him down. Meanwhile, Jean and Bill made it out with just 500 psi left in Jean's tank. Had they been delayed just a few more minutes, they would have drowned. They immediately informed the others that Michael and Kent were behind them. Their lights had been visible just before they exited. The remaining divers quickly re-entered the tunnel, hoping to find them in time. Just 250 feet inside, they spotted Michael and Kent's lights, but something was wrong. They weren't moving. As they got closer, the truth became clear. Both had run out of oxygen and drowned, just 5 minutes from the exit. If you liked this video, subscribe for similar ones or join my Discord to suggest another.